Welcome to International Business News. I am Lekon Onobanjo. And let's start by telling you that equity markets have at last started listening to central bank policymakers, now increasingly synchronizing plans. Those stocks are averse to it. U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said that the central bank will continue to raise rates to curtail inflation, even as those rate increases cause pain for households and businesses. In tune with Powell, European Central Bank Board member Isabel Schnabel said that central banks around the world risk losing public trust and must now act forcefully to combat inflation, even if that drags their economies into recession. In reaction to Jerome Powell's comments, Asian markets sank on Monday. The dollar rallied and doused the prospects of a cut in the new year. The hefty selling tracked a painful day on Wall Street, where all three main indexes tanked between 3 and 4% as investors contemplated an extended period of monetary tightening. The US dollar surged to a 20-year high against the basket of currencies as the index scaled to a fresh two-decade peak of 109.44 in the Asia trade. Economists at Goldman Sachs have sharply cut British growth forecasts and expect a recession to begin later in the year as the impact of surging inflation on households' disposable incomes hits consumption. Goldman expects that the recession to begin in the fourth quarter of 2022, and the forecast the economy will contract by 0.6% in 2023. British energy bills will jump 80% to an average of £3,549 a year from October, the regulator said on Friday, and that is the latest example of what politicians have called a cost of living crisis. Finally, European natural gas prices plunged the most since April as Germany said its gas stores are filling up faster than planned ahead of winter. Benchmark Dutch front-month futures fell as much as 16% to €286 per megawatt hour, reversing last week's jump of almost 40%. The supply situation remains fragile as Europe is grappling with its worst energy crisis in decades. Lower Russian flows, outages in Norway, and increasing competition for LNG supplies are all bullish factors that won't go away anytime soon. And that's all on International Business News. Do stay with us. We have more for you on Business Edge.
Now, Nigeria's aviation sector has faced a number of issues in recent years. COVID-19 and now the Russia-Ukraine crisis have hit the industry hard and have exacerbating existing problems. The same forex crisis that has hit the Nigerian economy is magnified in the aviation sector, where before last week, as much as $464 million of foreign airlines proceeds were trapped in the country. The International Air Transportation Association revealed that the revenue was being withheld from repatriation as of July 2022. This development caused Emirates Airlines to announce the suspension of flights to Nigeria from September 1st, with several others, including British Airways, gearing up to take similar action. But just as last week was coming to an end, the Central Bank of Nigeria released $265 million to all foreign airlines operating in Africa's largest economy. Dr. Alexander Nwuba, President, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Nigeria, is with me in the studio. So, Dr. Nwuba, let's start with how this money actually got trapped. It's about $464 million. Some have said it was actually as much as $600 million. But how did we get to where we were as of last week?
What happened essentially is that over the months, airlines had been selling tickets in Naira, accumulating these funds in the banks, and when they required these funds to be transferred, the funds were not made available to them. And so that's why they were classified as trapped. There was a lot of pressure put on the central bank to prioritize the release of these funds to the airlines. And last week, we had a situation where $265 million was released to the airlines and enabled them. The fact was, because these airlines were not getting these monies, they had to start planning for alternative sources of the money. And that's what saw airfares rise in the last few weeks.
So further to that, is this an issue of just a few months, a year? How long has this issue of inability of the airlines to repatriate their funds actually been going on? Because it sort of feels like this eventually was going to be a problem, but we just kept waiting for it to become a bigger issue.
It has been a problem. Every sector of the economy is having challenges accessing dollars, from power to aviation. And so from the beginning of the year, the central bank had a problem of making these payments available to foreign carriers. And until the pressure became really bad, the effort was made to clear this balance. And that had very negative impacts for the economy.
So let's also take a look at this from the domestic side. So a lot of the conversation has focused on this as a CBN policy, which only affects foreign airlines. But that repatriation of funds and this Forex crisis Nigeria is having, we've seen it happen and affect all areas of the economy. Is there an effect also on the domestic airlines that are operating within the country?
Well, in this situation, the foreign airlines have an advantage. They sell in Naira, expect to remit their funds in dollars. The domestic airlines, on the other hand, selling Naira, expected to keep the money here in Nigeria. But like foreign airlines, they meet all their costs in dollars, most of their costs in dollars, from fuel, which is sold in Naira at the dollar benchmark, to maintenance costs, which are paid for in dollars, to aircraft leases, to flight crew training, all of which are paid for in dollars. And they don't have the luxury of a guaranteed exchange rate. So they've been reaching to what we call the parallel market, really an illegal foreign exchange market, to meet these needs. And so while we've addressed a portion of the arrears of the foreign airlines, we're yet to address the balance, which will come to you. As you know, this has not been the peak season. We're just coming out of the summer season, going into spring, to the fall, when students start to go back, people start to go back to business. August is the month when all of Europe is on holiday, and so business will start picking up in September, so demand will spike. And towards the end of the year at Christmas, when we have the highest rate of travel, demand will be there. So what we've managed to clear are the arrears. We're not able to keep able to measure up with the current, and we're going to have real challenges down the road with the future.
And this is actually leading me straight to my next question, because last week, just around Friday, it was about 265 million the central bank released. How far does this really go to ease the tension? What happens to the rest of the money that is still being held in one way or the other? And is this really enough to keep the airlines flying? So Emirates says they're suspending flights from September the 1st. We don't know if this will change their mind. British Airways and others have said they're thinking of similar moves, and there are about 27 airlines who are actually affected. So what do you think this release of $265 million actually does for this situation?
Well, prior to the release, the opinion was, will central bank honor its obligation to make this transfer? The release gives the signal that the central bank will do what is necessary to address this problem. And so that's a good signal, not just to the airline industry, but all of the major players that have access foreign exchange, including investors that have to bring money into this economy, and all of the school fees and all of these things that will make demands on foreign exchange. So the signal is to the airline industry that will make due on these payments. We may be a bit late, but we're actually sending a good sign. And that will help to bring down low fares. As you've seen, fares that were 500,000 are now 3 million to the UK, etc. And so by this signal, and why they went up was the airlines were not sure whether they would get the money from the central bank or would have to resort to the parallel market, and so had to hedge against that. But now that the central bank has sent a signal, essentially, that we'll do the needful, that would help to reduce these fares and also send a good sign. And we don't expect that Emirates, as a result of what has been done, will stop their operations, and neither will British Airways by the end of the year.
So there's an estimation out there that the departure of international carriers who provide around 80% of commercial aviation revenues to GDP would actually hinder the anticipated expansion of the aviation industry, and also could cost Nigeria some $1.36 billion. What do you think of this estimation? What do you think of even the critical nature that international airlines seem to play for Nigeria's aviation industry? How can we change that around to have a situation where domestic airlines are really the ones carrying the revenue for the country?
Well, that's the real challenge. When we signed these bilateral agreements with other countries, the expectation was that it would have balanced trade. And that's obviously the objective of the WTO and all trade partners in the world. The problem is that we've not scaled our capacity to take advantage of our end of the trade agreements. And so this only shows us that we need to do more within our economy. So we need to see substantially more investment going to the aviation sector. We need to find more creative solutions for the Ministry of Aviation as to how to grow capacity of the domestic airlines, which there are a number of proposals on the table, and that will enable us to compete. The problem is we've got to learn to compete. And we keep talking about competition with the international airlines, but we are also signatories to the African Continental Free Trade Area and the single air transport market within Africa. And so when those markets are activated, what role will Nigeria play? Or would that be a case of where we open up the Nigerian domestic markets to Ethiopian Airlines, Kenya Airways, South African Airways, etc. So yes, we have to address the needs of our domestic market and expand it so that we remain competitive, without which this drain is only a drop in the bucket of what the impact will be to our economy.
So I want to slightly just then bring in this whole conversation around the national carrier. We're hearing moves and reports again. Nigeria Air is coming back, is attempting to get back into the skies above Nigeria and above the continent, and hopefully across the world as well. Is that really the next move for Nigeria's aviation industry, or rather for the government on the industry compared to some of the issues that are on ground?
Well, the Nigeria Air project does not address our needs. If you know what it is like now, it's essentially a program that the government has defined as where we wet lease 3 airplanes and bring them in to fly the domestic market. That doesn't dent this impact we've had with the foreign carriers. So again, if you look at what that model means, it means that we're taking airplanes from another carrier somewhere else in the world. We're paying for the lease of the aircraft. We're paying for the crews that come here and stay in expensive hotels, earning dollars. We're not creating any real jobs in our own economy. So the reality is that that does not address the issue. Even if it did not operate in that manner, and we went back to the traditional arrangement, which we have said would be ownership of which Nigerians own 51% and foreigners own 49%. That 49% is an additional drain on the economy. So it's something that doesn't quite work. Nigeria Air is not the solution. The solution is to redesignate many of our Nigerian carriers, expand their operations as flag carriers so they can take advantage of the bilateral air service agreements Nigeria has entered into. We have to deal with the domestic industry. We have to find solutions to grow that industry so we remain competitive even within the region and beyond the international markets.
All right, so let's get back to the money that we're following right now. So $265 million was released last week, just towards the end of the week. You've said this is a good signal. It's a good, not gesture because it is what is owed, but it's a good sign to show that the CBN is serious about paying the money. Do we have details on when the rest of the money will be released? And I do have to ask, because this is Nigeria. We know how things tend to happen. What happens in a few weeks or in a few months if the airlines are unable to get the rest of their trapped funds?
Well, if the airlines are unable to get the balance of their money, they'll stop operating. But the way international business works is these airlines may have made some sales over the last few months. They're carrying them in their balance sheets as receivables. And in their economies, they are able to discount this receivable to banks and other financial institutions and have an interest rate carry on that. So the fact that we have sent a signal that we're willing to pay, it creates a comfort level that allows those lenders in their markets to provide them funding that will keep them operating. And so long as we continue to honor our obligations in reducing these debts and make it easy for them to address this market, they would continue operating into this market. So what we've got to ensure is to be able to keep trickling the funds over to them to keep that operation going. But again, it doesn't address the fact that we have to solve the problem within our local economy and create a means by which we can stop the drain of foreign exchange through these bilateral agreements. There's also the opportunity for commercial agreements beyond the existing bilateral agreements. And in those agreements, we're buying capacity in these foreign carriers. So those revenues revert to us instead of to the other side. And so we have to look at solving these problems one way or the other. But the most important element of that is to equip the domestic carriers to be competitive and to be able to take advantage of these agreements that are already in place.
All right, so my final question to you is this. A lot of people think the Nigerian market is just too big to be ignored. Emirates really won't go through with their threats. British Airways really won't do too much. But really, let's look at it. The challenges and the problems exist. Money is being made. But do you really think the Nigerian market is just too big to be ignored or even sidelined if we don't get our act together?
The Nigerian market is too big to be ignored. The Nigerian market is very big. It's a very, very substantial part of global travel. But the reality is nobody is going to lose money no matter how big this market is. And if we can't address their concerns and needs, they'll leave this market and leave it to us to sort out our own problems. So we're big enough to get the attention, but we're not too big to be left alone to handle our own matters.
All right, Dr. Alexander Nwuba, we'll leave it at that for now. This is probably a developing situation and conversation we'll continue to watch play out over the coming days and weeks. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me this afternoon.
All right, and there is still one more conversation for you. If you've always wanted to get involved in real estate, the next conversation is the one you need to listen to. Of course, all my other conversations you need to listen to, but this one will give you the ABCs of getting your money from real estate. Stick around.